Welcome everybody to the More Media webinar on the increasingly global world of film tax credits. As someone who works in film production, I've always viewed film finance as a bit of a dark art in which tax credits are a fundamental part of the kind of increasingly complex jigsaw of pulling together all sorts of strands to get films made. Over recent years, it seems to me it's become increasingly competitive between countries as tax credits become an incentive to try and get production into individual territories. It's a complex area, and fortunately, I have the full might of the whole More network with me today to provide some explanation and clarity. We will do a quick whistle-stop tour of the rules relating to credits in 6 countries. We're going to start in Europe with Italy, go through the UK, onto Ireland and France, and then cover off into Latin America and finally North America. As you can appreciate, with 6 countries, we've got a lot of ground to cover, and we will probably be tight for time. So I'm going to let all of my expert panelists talk first, and then please feel free to put questions in the chat, and we will pick them up and hopefully deal with as many of them as possible at the end. So to kick us off, I will introduce you to our first speaker, who is Marco Moscone from More in Italy. Hi, Marco.
Hi, Graham, and hi, everybody. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Greetings from Italy. I'll try to give, in a short time, a general overview of the incentives given by the state and local authorities in Italy. Well, Italy is an interesting country, not only for tourism, but also for media, TV, cinema production. From a cinematic point of view, it offers unique places, breathtaking views to shoot the scenes, interesting, unique locations, from the Sardinia seasides that sometimes seems similar to some Caribbean island, to the wonderful mountains in the Alps like Dolomites. And I think that when we talk about historical cities like Venice, Rome, or Florence, it's quite hard or almost impossible to find such a rich variety of historical sites, one close to the other. But Italy is not just its history or its landscape. Italy is also made by the Italians. With our defects, we are not particularly appreciated for our organization or punctuality, but also with our strengths, creativity, inventiveness, originality, and uncommon technical artistic skills. We do not have great economic resources, but we have many ideas, enthusiasm, energy, and when it comes to work, we do not hold back. The love of Italians for the stage, theater, opera is well known, but we have also a passion for cinema, and there's more than a bunch of names quite famous Italian cinema. Few names from the past: Federico Fellini, Sergio Leone, Vittorio De Sica, Bernardo Bertolucci, like famous directors, famous actors like Marcello Mastroianni, Sofia Loren. The music of Ennio Morricone and Nino Rota and Giorgio Moroder are known all over the world. And we have also a lot of good technicians like Vittorio Storaro, who won 3 Oscars for photography, special effects, costume designer like Milena Canonero for Oscar won, film editor like Pietro Scalia, and a set decorator like Dante Ferretti, who won 3 Oscars. We know that we cannot rely only on our history and our tradition. We are aware that in modern world, business is business, and it is money that moves the world. Therefore, Italy provides a different kind of support to movie production, from central government support like the tax credit and subsidies, and local subsidies from regions, and other special funds given by the central government. The most important support is the internal tax credit, which is given to production companies operating in cinema, TV, movies production, and for the technical and post-production industries, and also for the attraction of film investment in Italy. This tax credit is really interesting because it is tax exempt, both to IRES, which is the Italian corporate income tax, to IRAP, which is the regional tax. It doesn't reduce the deduction of interest or general expenses. And this tax credit can be used either directly or can be used to offset other taxes like VAT, tax withheld to employees, social security contributions, but it can also be sold to banks or financial institutions, so you can really transform this credit in real money. The amount of tax credit has recently raised from 30% to 40% in some situations. So the rate has increased and it can be recognized in several situations. The tax credit can be used also in order to attract in Italy film investment, because national executive production, post-production companies can benefit of a tax credit contribution, which is equal to 30% on the expenses incurred in the national territory. And this is particularly interesting for technical and post-production activities as a service company, because this contribution often translates into discount in favor of the foreign producer, who is aware of the fact that the executive producer will receive a contribution tax-free equal to 30% of the cost. Okay, there is also the external tax credit that is reserved for investors external to the film, to the audiovisual sector. So this is more for investors like financial institutions. And finally, there are some subsidies. Subsidies are given either by the government, and we have both automatic incentives and selective contributions. The automatic incentives and the selective contributions are given to Italian productions, and the fact of having an international co-production gives some point in the ranks, so it's easier to receive those kind of incentives if you're making an international co-productions. But it's very interesting also to pay attention to the local subsidies, because almost every Italian region has a film commission that gives funds for media production if you shoot the movie or whatever production you do in that particular region. So there are even some local incentives. Finally, there are also some other funds, special funds, deriving from bilateral or multilateral agreements given to international co-production. They are limited in time, so it is important to seize the moment and catch the opportunity when it arrives. It's quite common because almost every year there is an opportunity for Italian French production, Italian Portuguese production, and there's quite an interesting agreement between Italy, Spain, Portugal, and Latin American countries with the Ibermedia funds. But there are many more, and as I said before, these special funds come and you have to seize the moment. Graham, I think it's enough for Italy, so thank you for the attention. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Marco. Italy really does have a rich history of film production. We're now going to move on to one of my partners, Mike Hayes from Moore Kingston Smith in London. Mike.
All right. So in the UK, we have a whole range of tax credits for what we call the creative industries, and I've listed them all on that particular slide. We also have available research and development tax relief. Conceivably, some of the creative sector expenditure could qualify for R&D, but you can't claim both. You can only claim one relief on £1 of expenditure, so you can't claim both on the same expenditure. I've separated the two sorts of release into two groups, and the difference between the two is that on the left, those release film, high-end TV, etc., there is what's called a cultural British test, which doesn't apply to others on the right. Now, I'll talk about the culturally British test in a minute. It's not quite as British as you might think, and more of that later. So all those release work in sort of roughly the same way. So what actually happens is that you get an extra deduction based on qualifying costs. So this extra tax deduction is equal to the lower of 80% of total production expenditure or 100% of the UK or EEA core expenditure. I mentioned EEA because that's quite important. So it's not just expenditure in the UK. And for those that can't remember, the EEA includes the 27 members of the European Union, plus Iceland, Norway, and Liechtenstein. If the tax credit creates or increases a loss, then that can be surrendered and the tax office will give you a 25% repayable credit. And I've got an example of that in a second. There must be a production company, so there must be one company only that's responsible for incurring most of the expenses and actually for making most of the decisions. For film tax relief, it must be the intention that the film is produced for theatrical release. In other words, it's intended to go to the cinema. And that must be the plan from day one. If you're planning to do a film which will go straight to Netflix, it won't qualify for the film credit. It might qualify for the TV credit. It doesn't matter that once you've made the film, you've decided to actually say, well, we won't go to cinema, we'll go straight to TV or DVD, providing it was the intention that it should do in the first place. 10% of the core expenditure must be incurred in the UK or the EEA. And the tax relief is limited to production expenditure only. And just to go to the bottom bullet point, this excludes things on development of a project. So if somebody's picking up a potential film director or producer's picking up a new novel and is contemplating whether to turn this into a film or a TV program, then all that type of development expenditure does not qualify for the relief at all. It's only when you start to engage actors, book locations, studio time, etc., those sorts of costs, it's from then onwards that you get relief. So a very small example. So this is an example where we've got a company that incurs £1 million of core expenditure, 900,000 is spent in the UK, 100,000 in India, and in the first year, there's only £900,000 of income. So just to show how it works, so in my little sort of tax computation, I've got income of 900,000, total production expenditure of £1 million, so I've got a loss, but I'm also entitled to a further deduction, and that deduction is 80% of the total expenditure of £1 million, so that's only £800,000, or the UK expenditure, which in this case is 900,000, whichever is the smaller. So in this case, it's £800,000. So my tax loss gets increased from £100,000 to £900,000. So when we've created our tax loss of £900,000, we can either carry that forward against next year's profits, if that's what we want to do, or we can surrender part of that and get a repayable credit. And the amount that you can surrender is the lower of A or B. So A is the enhancement and B is the loss. So in this case, the lower of the amount is £800,000, and simply you can surrender that to HMRC and get a repayable credit, which in this case is £200,000. So I talked about the culturally British test. Now, this applies in slightly differently for film and to TV and to video games and to animation. They're all slightly different. But basically for film, these are the criteria that you've got to pick up points on. There's a total of 35 points spread over 4 categories, and you have to get at least a half of those, more than half. So in this case, you've got to have at least 18 points to qualify for the tax relief. So category A is all about the characters, the story. Is it an EEA story? Is it about an EEA type person? I don't intend to go through them all, etc., etc. Is it actually in an English language or one of the 6 recognized regional languages in the UK, or is it an EEA language? Then you get points for creativity, diversity, heritage, etc. And then there's extra points for actually doing the VFX, etc., etc. Post-production, where the music recording is done. You get extra points there, up to 5 points for that. And then finally, you get a whole load of points for where basically all the workers are coming from. So that could be the director, scriptwriter, lead actors, majority of the cast, etc., etc., the film crew. So if you've ever watched Star Wars, and I'm going to compete with Owen here, if you want to know why there's so many British actors in Star Wars, it's because it actually ups the number of points you can get under this category. If you have to actually rely on points from categories C and D, you do have to get an accountant's report, which we can actually do. So an accountant's report just to demonstrate that you meet those criteria. So I've almost done. What I would say is just to talk a little bit about TV. TV works in a slightly different way. It's called high-end TV. So certain types of program don't qualify. That would be news programs, and thankfully game shows don't qualify. So it's really going to be documentaries and dramas. For the TV credit, it's got to be for a slot on TV that's greater than half an hour. So a 30-minute slot on TV won't qualify. And also the average spend per hour of production is got to be at least £1 million. So it's only going to be expensive productions that are going to qualify. And, you know, the types of ones which you might be familiar with that have actually become sort of popular worldwide are things like Downton Abbey and Game of Thrones. And I'll finish on Game of Thrones because it does show how international this is. Because the studio work is actually done in Belfast in Northern Ireland, and some of the location work's there. But I've also worked out that location work's done in Spain, Croatia, Iceland, and Malta, all of which is within the EEA. And I know some of those countries have their own tax credits, and also in Morocco, which is not within the EEA, but has probably got its own credits as well. So that's me done for my little bit on the UK. I'm happy to take questions later.
Thanks, Mike. That's great. We're now going to move on to Owen Bracken from Moore Island in Dublin.
So look, as we've got about 8 minutes, I'll cut this short. So as you can see, Ireland has a reputation for over 100 years in film production. We made our first, I suppose, international film in 1910. But as you can see on the right-hand side, a young John Wayne chased Maureen O'Hara around Ireland in 1953. And John Ford won an Academy Award for that. So I suppose that depicted rural scenes in Ireland, and I think our film production really took off since that. So since the 1950s, we've started to make many blockbuster films. I've just mentioned Braveheart, Harry Potter, Star Wars. And I suppose a couple of years after that film, The Quiet Man, Ireland started building its first studios in Ireland. So we eventually progressed to making various TV series. And that's still quite doing well. But as you can see, I suppose the real growth in Ireland over the past couple of years has been in animation. There's been a tenfold growth in our animation business in the past 10 years. And you'll see in the last slide, there's the small company down in Kilkenny who they're up for another Academy Award with Wolf Walkers. And that's their fifth I suppose, time up for an Academy Award. And they've increased their staff numbers by 30% in 2020, even in a pandemic. So I suppose this overall sector is worth $1 billion now to Ireland, and we've 20,000 people in full-time employment in this sector. So I'll just whistle or go through this pretty quickly. Obviously, like every other country, there's a wide array of government funding, and that's to help people produce film, TV, or animation in Ireland. It's centrally controlled by a body called Screen Ireland. And I just checked before, I think there's about 50 different grants. So I don't intend getting into them in any way, in any detail. I suppose one of the key things, and not just for the media sector, is Ireland's 12.5% corporate tax rate. So even before I start talking about film tax credits, you're off to a very low tax base anyway at 12.5%. We've had that rate unchanged for over 20 years now. And I would imagine that 12.5% rate of tax will still be in effect when I retire. I suppose it's a niche market, the 25% R&D credit. We do have a number of studios in Ireland that do specialize in post-production and visual effects. And I am aware that a number of those studios do claim the 25% R&D tax credit. That's on top of the film credit and on top of the 12.5% corporate tax deduction. And last but not least, I'll just mention that there was a very, very generous tax exemption for individuals. When I was a small boy, that was unlimited. So you had a number of people going down as script writers or composers or just coming to Ireland, more or less be tax resident and making a fortune and not paying any tax. Then in 2010, it was reduced to 250,000, and now it's reduced to 50,000. So it's not much of an incentive, but it's still there. So I suppose this is the real reason why Ireland is a location for post-production or for filming. We have the same as everyone else. We have a tax credit available. It's available to a producer company, and there's a definition of what a producer company is. And even though it's referred to as a film tax credit, it does cover television, drama, animation, and documentaries and so forth. So how much is it? It's 32% of eligible Irish expenditure. But if you want to film in a rural location that's, I suppose, a bit out of the way, which a lot of people do, because we don't have fancy cities like London or like Rome or like Venice. So if you go slightly out of the way to make your film, you can increase that 32% to 37%. So I suppose 32% of what? Well, it's 32% or 37% of the lower of these three amounts. It's all eligible expenditure, 80% of the cost of production, or 70 million. So let's say you go down the country in Ireland and you spend 70 million. The credit could be worth up to 26 million euros, or just slightly under 26 million euros. So what do you do with this credit? Well, first of all, the credit is offset against your corporate tax liability. But in most scenarios, your corporate tax liability is going to be small because you're only paying 12.5% corporate tax rate. So if there's an excess, the Irish revenue will just refund you that money. Now, I suppose the good thing is this is all self-assessment. You claim it just on your corporate tax return. And in a couple of instances, obviously, revenue will ask for the backup documentation. But there is no, I suppose, the point I'm trying to get at, there's no big procedure to go through to actually claim the credit. It is self-assessment. So I suppose another good point is you can claim the credit before you complete the project. So if your paperwork is in order and sometimes you can be asked to produce it, you don't have to produce it straight away, but you can claim up to 90% of the credit based on your budgeted expenditure for the film, or you can wait till you're finished. But most people will go 90% of budgeted. I suppose what is eligible expenditure? Eligible expenditure is the costs of production that are expended on the project in Ireland. So for instance, you can see that the costs, it's typically what you would expect. It's all the cast and the crew working in Ireland, all the goods, all the services. And as I mentioned before, there's a lot of post-production or visual effects done in Ireland. So all that qualifies as well. And just to mention, the only thing that doesn't really qualify for this is if it's a really, really small project. So the project has to be a minimum or have a minimum qualifying expenditure of 125,000, and the project has to be in excess of 250,000. And that's it from me. Back to you, Graham.
Thanks, Owen. That's great. We're now going to move on to Stefan Thomas, who is a partner in our More firm in Paris, Cofra. Stefan, thank you very much.
Hello, everybody. I am delighted to be with you today to present you the financial and fiscal incentive mechanisms that exist in France in the field of media and film production. But to start with, I have to compete a little bit with my Moore colleagues to convince you that France is the right place to be. So let me remind you that in France, we have plenty of beautiful and diverse landscapes. Some of them are extremely famous, like Saint-Tropez, with actors like Brigitte Bardot and Louis de Funès. Sorry, Marco, but the city of love is Paris, of course. not Roma and Venice. And sorry, here again, for action films, we have Normandy, of course, with D-Day beaches, chateaux, and other famous historic places. But more seriously, and in summary, there are three main ways to encourage media and film companies to carry out their activities in France. First of all, we have a very interesting mechanism in terms of sponsorship or patronage. Then there is a special tax credit for international productions. And finally, I would like to say a word about the funds that can be obtained to finance co-productions in France. But let's start with the first mechanism, the one about sponsorship. Sponsorship has become an interesting way for companies to communicate, not only because it is rewarding from the point of view of media impact, which is very good at the moment, but also because it is rewarded from a fiscal point of view. As you can see, indeed, in France, sponsorship gives the right to a 60% tax credit that can be offset against corporate income tax. This is available for donations that are made to non-profit organizations that carry out, for instance, innovative, collaborative, or humanitarian projects in general, although the scope of projects may be quite broader. This method is nowadays particularly used in the field of corporate communication, when you see films with the name of the company that's sponsored, and is a good way to increase the social and environmental responsibility of a company. If a company has chosen to use this mechanism, what are the things to watch out for? First of all, it must be ensured that the structure that is the beneficiary of the donation is an organization that is eligible under the French General Tax Code. In other words, a non-profit organization. One of the conditions for a non-profit organization is that its management must not be carried out in an interested manner, which implies in particular that the direct or indirect remuneration of its directors is strongly limited. Secondly, sponsorship should not be confused with advertising or sponsoring. In practice, it is necessary to check the precise consideration for the donation, and if the consideration is too important in terms of value, the donation risks being requalified as an ad expense, an advertising expense, which will not be eligible for the tax credit. And finally, in order to secure the operation and the granting of a donation, we recommend drafting a contract and respecting all the formalities provided in the area of sponsorship. The second interesting incentive and financial means on the French market is the tax credit for international productions. This is a tax credit that can be also offset against corporate income tax. Its amount is 30% of the expenses incurred, and recently an additional 10% visual effects, because you know probably that France is quite known in this area. So an additional 10% visual effects related tax credit has been granted. Therefore, projects including a substantial amount of visual effects may be at the end eligible for a 40% tax credit. Numerous expenses are included in the calculation of this tax credit, such as salaries paid to the direction, production and animation staff, renting locations, technical goods, services, accommodation, catering, and so on. Finally, this tax credit is open to all film and television production services that are carried out on the French soil. This includes live action projects, films, feature films, TV series, web series, and so on. And if there is an interest in this option, there are also certain conditions to be met and indicated on the post-it. In practice, we recommend checking that the applicable criteria are met. First, check the services rendered by the company must be eligible for the tax credit. Second recommendation, we invite the companies concerned to define all the expenses that will be incurred in France, to know if they are included in the basis of the assessment of the tax credit. And finally, it is recommended that they seek prior approval from the French National Center for Cinema, the so-called CNC, to ensure that the nature of the project gives rise to the application of the credit applied. The third means that exists in France can be defined under the general term of co-production funding. Under this term, we can group together a very wide range of possibilities that cover different types of contracts, aid, subsidies that exist on the part of many players. This concerns feature films or co-productions, and the financial resources can come from many sources, such as the French television networks, TF1, France Télévisions, Arte, or M6, for instance. There are also private funds specialized in financing films and film production in France, such as Sofica or the French National Center for Cinema that we already mentioned. All of them often fund co-production activities on French soil and have considerable budgets devoted to these projects. In this case, what are our practical recommendations for obtaining these funds? You can see them on the post-it. It is necessary to ensure that the company's project is qualified as a feature film or a co-production, and it is also necessary to determine the conditions of each financial participation, since, as we have said, there is a very wide range of means available, and each means meets specific requirements. In conclusion, there are three main ways to find financial sources to produce in France, three types of means, as we saw, and they can be used all together. So you have to make a mix of them if you have a project in France. It is also thanks to the existence of these different sources of aid and income that many films, including blockbusters, are regularly shot and produced in France. And in this slide, we have mentioned a few examples that you will certainly be familiar with. I would like to thank you for your attention and remind you that, of course, our teams are at your disposal to help you in the context of their approach to the various economic players in France. And if films have been shot thanks to the help and advice of more colleagues, you can be sure that we will promote them all around us. Thank you.
Thanks, Stefan. That's great. I did say at the beginning that this is a competitive world, and it's good to know that my more colleagues have already turned this into a competition about what films were filmed where. We are now going to take a break from Europe and move over to Mateus Tejero in Buenos Aires, who is going to, I think, give us a quick run through not only of tax credits in Argentina, but more generally across the whole of Latin America. Mateus.
Hi, hi to all. Thanks, Florian, for the introduction. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. I don't know where you are located. Thanks. It's quite a challenge to summarize the whole vision in a couple of slides and a minute, but I'll try to at least to give you some idea of the different alternatives you can find around Latin America. In case of North and Central America, some of the most important incentive regimes that we have is, for example, in Mexico, where you can have VAT refunds and also you can get tax credits on investment. You can access to loans at reduced rates also, and you can receive rebates on your investment at 7.5%. Then overlapping a little bit with North America, it's Puerto Rico that you can have tax credits there. It will depend on they have different rates for investment, for tax, for staff or other expenses. that they go to 25% to 50%. And they also have tax exemptions and reduced tax rates for the production. Then you also have Panama. They have a 15% discount on expenses that you spend there on all your costs there. Also in Dominican Republic, it's there's a 25% tax credit on expenditures, and then in Trinidad and Tobago, you can have rebates there up to 55% on technical staff and 35% on expenses. There are some other more regimes around that region, but at least these are the most significant ones for you to have a brief idea. And then going to the south of the region, there are in Argentina we have some tax exemptions and credits for productions. Mainly, it's for long-term investment. So it's for production houses that are already established, and when you produce to export series or films or TV, and also there are some subsidies for different film productions. Then in case of Brazil, there's a specific regime that's just for the state of Sao Paulo. There's a big local commission there for filming, and you can access to rebate from 20 to 30%, which it's a good alternative, being that's the only regime that you have for that in Brazil. And also in Colombia, you can access also for tax credits and rebates. They have different rebate rate on if it's belonging to technical staff, services, or expenses. And also you can access to VAT exceptions for your investments. And then there's also a very important regime in Uruguay where you can access to 25% rebates on your investments. You can also get some VAT exceptions. And there are free trade zone incentives. They have several free trade zones in Uruguay. And now, specifically for craft and audiovisual productions, there's going to be one actually working next year near Punta del Este, which is one of the most renewed, well-known vacation places in Latin America, and it's also close to an airport. And they are building a special trade zone there for production houses and craft and audiovisual production. Here are some tips and recommendations if you are going to develop your business and produce in Latin America. It's something that you have in mind, that you will have to be aware of bureaucracy, some requests from the unions on permits and requirements. At minimum days you need for shooting to get those rates there. You have to focus on taxes and custom issues, and it's important for you to analyze those issues before closing any agreement, because there could be different effects on your cost. And also, the region has a very well-developed industry and well-known professionals. So it's a good idea to get local partners there for your support from the beginning, because they already used to work with all these paperwork and issues, and it would be better for you to have that kind of local help, and also to hire local advisors. Because it will be easy for you to develop your business there. And also use the local offices of creative industry. Many, not saying all, but nearly all the countries here have a specific desk for creative industries that can give you support. And also, if you can count on our embassy here. The Trade Department usually helps you to get access to those contacts and support to get those kind of credits or incentives that you will need. It's something that is very important to apply for some benefits. It's mandatory to have a company already registered. So this is very useful to do it in partnership with a local production house, because it would be very hard for you to get all the registration. And in the other case, it's something that could be smoothly. And also, I mentioned the rebate rate or percentage that you can access. Be aware in of cases that they are capped, so it's something that you should know in advance, that maybe it's the effective rate could be lower. So it's something that it's very important to take a look at. And also, benefits could differ inside the country, because there are different benefits in different states or cities or neighborhoods sometimes for the shooting. So it's something that is location. There is very important, because it will depend on the benefit you can access or not. And also, as it's a very large region. Just do not analyze the location and incentives that you can access. Keep an eye on other aspects of the country when you are preparing your business plan and your production, because political and economical stability will vary significantly from one country to another, and the easiness to do business too. So it's very important to analyze that before your business, or to include that in your business plan. And also, don't take things for granted, because things can vary a lot from one country to another. So maybe you sold things in one way in one country, but when you move to, or if you have to shoot in another country for the same project, things could be significantly different. So it's important to analyze things separately. And I think that's at least a quick brief around Latin America for incentives in this sector. Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you, Mateus. That's a very quick spin around the whole of Latin America and very comprehensive. So thank you very much. Our last speaker will cover North America for us. I welcome Jarrett Gannon from Armanino in Los Angeles. Those of you who are savvy on time differences will know it's very early in the morning for Jarrett. So we thank him for joining us. Jarrett.
Thank you, Graham. I'm going to be talking about film incentives and credits in the US. So just a quick overview of the landscape first, and then I'll be diving into it a little more. So the US is divided into 50 states, as many of you know, and each state is kind of like its own country with its own tax rules, own incentives. So about 40 of the states in the US offer tax credits for film productions, TV productions, and animations. The rules are going to vary state to state. On the federal side, there's no credits, but there's still some important incentives regarding accelerating deductions, which give companies an incentive to shoot their film domestically. So this isn't cash in your pocket, but it does entice investment and make it a little easier to raise capital. On the state side, so typically we'll pair up with a film incentive and financing firm that handles applying for the credit and monetizing it. Sometimes you get a refund of the credit, sometimes you sell it or borrow against it. So starting off on the federal side, so typically when you're incurring costs for production, again, whether it's TV or a film production, you're required to capitalize your cost and deduct your costs once you place that production in service. And this is the income forecast method, which isn't the worst answer. You're deducting your spend over the income stream of the project. But on the federal side, you can get some favorable cost recovery rules if your film is, if the compensation paid for your film is spent 75% or more in the United States. So in that case, you could take advantage of two favorable cost recovery provisions in the tax code here. And they're a little different. There's some nuances between the two, but the short answer for both of them is that they're going to give you some accelerated cost recovery. So 181 will let you deduct your costs as you incur them before your production is actually released. and code section 168K or bonus depreciation will let you write off the entire cost of your production when it's released. So you're not stuck waiting to recover the revenue in later years. Often it's over a 10-year period. So this is very favorable cost recovery rules. And I do want to mention that both of these are temporary, though 181 dies and comes back to life, it seems like, every year. Currently, it's in place through the end of 2025, but we expect that it'll get renewed. And bonus is starting to phase out in 2023, and it'll be gone in 2026. And that one is not really as much of a sure thing to come back. So between these two, there's a difference in how the laws apply. There's different dollar limitations and different timing. So our clients often pair up their film libraries. They'll have some qualifying productions, and they'll elect 181 on some of them and bonus on others to pair up the tax deductions. So that's it on the federal side. And then on the state and local side, these are where there's more standard incentives like film credits that actually put cash in your pocket and help finance the production. So these range from 20% to 40% of your total spend in the state. And the rules are dramatically different depending on what state you're in. And so I'll go through a couple of the more major credits in some of the more major states that we see a lot. California is a major credit, and on the income tax side, sometimes we don't even see the California credit. The incentive and financing firm handles all the documentation, and there's not a lot of interplay on the income tax side. A similar New York contrasts with this. Typically, the incentive and financing firm comes in and helps the production apply for the credit, and then everything gets attached to the state income tax return, and it's a refundable credit that's requested over a 3-year period. So there's a timing difference with New York that needs to be factored in. You often don't get your credit on the front end while you're incurring production costs. So typically our clients borrow against it. And depending on the size of your credit, it's typically a 3-year period to get your full credit back. So our clients are usually pushing us to get the returns in and get their all of their refunds back to them. So there's a couple of things that you can do with respect to accelerating those refunds with adopting fiscal years and closing the entity down to accelerate later installments. And then the other two very large incentives are Georgia and Louisiana. And we see probably 50% of the credits that we see are from these states. The Georgia incentive is claimed on a tax return, and it's a little unique in that it's not a refundable credit. So it's applied against state tax liability. So a lot of our clients don't have a tax liability specifically within the state of Georgia, but Georgia lets them sell the credit. So credit can be sold to a firm or a company that has a Georgia liability. I've had a lot of my clients sell their credits to companies like Apple, and typically they get around 70 cents to the dollar when they sell credit. Louisiana is similar. You have to sell it, not refundable. And so what we see with Louisiana is a lot of our clients have their main holding company, and they'll have many productions going on within various states. So their production company will charge a fee to the Louisiana-based production to gross up the amount of the spend in Louisiana and increase the amount of credit that they get. So this presents a unique challenge. There's withholding tax on that production fee that's charged, which you can get back, but there's a lot of nuances based on how your special purpose vehicle is set up to fund to film the production in Louisiana, and that's just something I'd caution on the front end. A little bit of structuring discussions go a long way in getting your Louisiana tax withholding back and monetizing your credit. So with all of these, whether you're a corporation, a partnership, or a disregarded entity, it's going to have an impact on how you get your production and the different forms of entity. You know, some are preferable for certain states and absolute no-nos for other states. I believe that's all I have today. Yep. So thank you for your time, and that's all from the US side. Back to you, Graham.
Thanks, Jared. That's great. That's obviously our quick whistle stop tour is now over around the world. So thank you all. You've all done pretty well on kind of managing this to time. We don't have a lot of time left, but I thought I would just spin one quick question that's come in around the group, which is really just about how easy it is to make the claims. They all sound very complicated when you kind of talk the rules, and how quickly the claims get processed and it actually turns into money for people. So maybe I can kind of limit you all to a sentence or two. Jarrett, you're still open, so maybe we could start with you.
Yeah, it's going to be very varied based on what state you're in. So typically our clients borrow against the credit. So that's a way to kind of get around the timing that each state's going to have. And the rules are very complex. So you'll always have a local firm on the ground or a national firm that specializes specifically in tax credit that helps walk through the entire process.
Perfect. Thank you. Marco, you're the other one, I think, who said that the claim could be sold. Is that why people sell them, to facilitate quicker payment?
Yeah, especially the internal tax credit can be sold to banks and financial institutions. So if the company is not able to utilize directly the tax credit, it can be sold, so you can transform the tax credit into real money.
Perfect. Thank you. Owen, other than being competitive and tell me everything in Ireland is great, how quick are things in Ireland?
It used to be complicated. You used to have to submit documents into the revenue and almost get pre-approval. That's been changed since 2018, and now it's purely on a self-assessed basis. So it's as easy as ticking a box on your corporate tax return. Your corporate tax return goes in 9 months after your accounting year end. So if you've an excess credit, you'll get all of it. You can apply for it 9 months after the accounting year end.
Perfect. Thank you. Stefan, can you give me a view on the complexity or otherwise in France?
Yes, in France, you don't need a pre-approval of the expenses. You have a check after that by the tax authorities, of course, and the tax credit can be transformed into cash 3 months after the closing of the fiscal year concerned. It's theoretically possible to sell the tax credit to the banks, but from a practical point of view, it's quite hard, in fact.
Okay, thank you. Mike, do you want to comment on the UK?
Yes, it's much the same as Ireland, I think. So it's dealt with on the company self-assessment tax return, and if you're due a repayable credit, you'll probably get that back, say 6 weeks in a good year, or to 8 weeks after you've filed the return and the claim.
Perfect. Thank you. Matthias, I will allow you to go last. You don't have to comment about the whole of Latin America. You could just take Argentina if that's your specialized subject.
Oh, but I can give you an idea. It's the paperwork. It's not easy around the whole region. So, and if you take a look to the World Bank ranking, they do a ranking from doing business. Then you can find that mostly that in countries where it's easy to do business, you get the paperwork faster and receive the money faster than in others. So it's but it's as the other guys say, it's important to in most cases to have a local partner, a production house that is already registered, but you need they will access easily to the credits to refund you, and that would be a good idea from the beginning to start the process with a local production house already established here.
Perfect. Thank you very much. That's all very quick. Well done, guys. I want to thank you all for speaking so elegantly and so promptly. Thank everybody also for attending. If there are any more questions that people suddenly feel they have after the webinar, please do not hesitate to email us directly. But I wish you all the rest of a very good day. Thank you very much.